low with the voice, so we don't have a lot of ups and downs. Thanks again for having me today here. My name is Eneida Hasko. I work for Philip Morris International, and I would like to share with you today a couple of practices of how we are handling change as a corporation. For the ones of you who doesn't know, we are going through a global change of product. We are going toward more a smoke-free future in terms of product, and basically this is generating a lot of organizational changes inside. In order for us to be prepared for the future, but as well to deploy this change inside out, not only outside in, we are basically gathering information, practices, and building on the capabilities. However, what we noticed in the recent years, especially on the last 5 years, was that we were deploying projects, we were doing transformations for the last 20 years, right? But what was happening was mainly connected to the fact of not being able to sustain this change in the organization. Most of the changes that we were doing through our finance processes, most of the changes that we were actually improving the efficiency rate of our deliverables, was not sustained well enough for us to trigger the result that we were aiming. So this was generating a lot of additional projects. We would realize on the last decade that we were kind of repeating ourselves in the projects that we were establishing. From transformation, we were going to migration. From migration, we were going to integration. And later on, we were building certain capabilities which were not really strong enough to sustain our objective, the main objective of having an efficient to-go inside setup that would enable the stability that we were looking forward. I was thinking on how to start this presentation, actually, had a couple of ideas, but then I was trying to focus it more on one thing, which is the most important, right? What we are talking today here is change, and change mostly on the people side. Something that for usually bigger corporations is, let's say, not very much in focus. Not because they are not focused on their employees, no, God forbid that, but because they are looking at the objectives more practically most of the time. It's all about the achievement, the success. Comes together with the team, comes together with the people. Change, we don't like it, we fear it, and myself one of them, but we can't stop it from coming. I mean, it's coming anyway, right? We either adapt to change or we get left behind. It's a bit strong, right? Like, we get left behind, what will happen? We can't catch up. We can always catch up, right? That's why we put in place practices, that's why we share experience. That's why we are here today, right? All of us, to share how it looks from different perspectives and to learn from each other, to see what fall into bits and pieces and how we can actually build something from it, or maybe put the puzzle back together. What I wanted to initially start with for you was, in order for the concept in my current corporation to be actually accepted well regarding to the change management per se, was really very challenging at the beginning to bring the change management topic while we were discussing transformation. Why? Because usually we have a PM, a project manager, we have a transition manager, who is actually covering almost all, right? They have a team, there is a division, it's geographically distributed, it's connected to the product, to the launch, is it digital, is it integration? But never had we ever thought to have it split at the beginning. I'm talking here a decade ago, 15 years ago. And the reason why was because usually, talking about finance department as such, myself, I am from a background of finance, it was very difficult to quantify it and very difficult to prove the need of the change management. Not as such, when we were pitching the idea, like in 2019, we realized that through change management, yes, internally for us, we could as well channel growth. And here we are, what to say, like 5 years later, and we can see what is actually happening. And I've picked for you 3 points from the McKinsey People Organization and Performance, which is one of the, let's say, latest updates on the shift of what organization is facing. One of them, the focus that I would like to bring to you today, is on the efficiency reload. We deal with a lot of efficiency program within my organization, so we have established a kind of a methodology on how we are actually managing the change there. Followed by the closing up of the capability chasm. Well, this is also something that has to do with sustainability, right? What I was talking at the beginning of this presentation. We talk about deploying change, we did the project, everything went great, here are the results, and we tell to the departments, deal with it. I mean, your finance, your sales, your operations, but there was no notion of sustaining it internally. And then the last but not least, the leadership self-awareness and inspiring. Why? Why the leadership? I mean, leadership or the sponsor, right? When we were trying to pitch again, going back in time to the idea of the change management per se, we were facing a lot of problems with the sponsors. The sponsors were the first ones who actually were not very well convinced why we needed to do certain surveys, why we needed to do certain communications, why we needed the sponsors to repeat the messages, why we needed them to talk to the people more over and over again. Here, again, we were facing a mentality shift, we were facing as well cultural changes, right? We have different typology of leaders that are from different geographical overseas, and they are leading different organizations, but nevertheless, for all of them, the only one thing that they all had in common was, why do we need to really invest time into it, right? Why is it so important? I mean, we are sharing this information with you. You are running the transformation office. You guys can handle, right? Why do we need to be present? Looking at the right-hand side, you may see the ProSci, which is the methodology I hope some of our change practitioner followers here are familiar with. And basically, if you look closely, you have a couple of expected organizational changes by industry. I have highlighted mainly the ones that are connected to finance when it comes to regulatory changes and compliancy, and as well regarding to the education services. They were interesting for me to look from my inside out of what I'm currently handling in my portfolio, but at the same time, usually in most of our organizations, the financial services is one of the, let's say, supporting functions when we find most of our efficiencies, right, inside out. So having seen that in common with a couple of colleagues and fellows, we realized that actually what we were trying to deliver here was not anymore a transformation nowadays. We were moving toward the integration, because all the time we were such an alert of figuring out the efficiencies that we really needed to stabilize the change that we had implemented in order to deliver these efficiencies in time, correctly, and how they were expected, right? Impact. I will stop very, very quickly here. This is just what we were trying to share when we were asked the question, why do we need you guys? Why is this really happening? And basically the shift of the combo partnership between project management and change management, explaining this difference and understanding the impact, and basically followed by the value, right? If we are not doing change management, like we have two projects, one we do and one we don't do at all, we risk a rate of adoption in around 40 to 60%. And this rate of adoption as well is influencing, basically in terms of value, is influencing as well the productivity, which is currently, for the ones that are not adopted, it reduces it up to 75%. So imagine, in a 40 to 60% workforce that hasn't adopted change, with a productivity less than 75% of this population, you will have a loss around 30 to 45%. And then overall, this loss, where does it go? I mean, for the finance folks, it's the one and only case, to our ROI, right? So if we have a drop of ROI around 30 to 40% without change management, I believe this was the language that we used and happened to be quite beneficiary. I'm laughing because I'm remembering the storyline before when we were pitching it to our financial stakeholders in our corporation. And when they were looking at the results of the proof, because we actually tested it, we went in one project without change management at all, zero. We left it all with the project manager. We did very formal communication, and we followed a very hierarchical methodology. And then we did another project, which we actually brought the change management into place, realizing towards the result that was the moment that shifted the turn. So it started with the numbers, but then where it landed actually is also in other elements. And here I'm not talking only about the corporation which I'm part of. I mean, we have a lot of collaboration with advisories, of course, for change management, exchanging practices, delivering the trainings of the practitioners. As you may see, here there are as well quite well-known corporations which they tried to do project deployment, change implementation without using the change management part, right? Kind of having it either low or thinking that due to the size of the organization and the impact, it wasn't necessary enough to be brought into the light. Well, at this point, I mean, having shared with you, basically this is the way how the concept was introduced internally, we are still missing something. Because we showed, right, practically how the numbers went, we showed to the people actually what we were able to do. But what we were missing was the deployment part. We needed to come up with basically a combination of models. Here I'm showing you ADKAR. I believe most of you are familiar with it. To be honest, from my perspective, leading a department for the last 4 years and setting up actually this department, one of the biggest challenges was the combination of methodologies, right? This diagnosis at the beginning, what we are trying to achieve and how to do it. And usually the direction which we would take would be very simple. For me, the ADKAR has worked, I mean, of course, Kotter as well is one of the main ones which I would have considered to mix together with ADKAR, having in mind that it diagnoses, right, the change. Whereas with ADKAR, you are more looking how the leaders say at this light part, right, at this people part. Actually, it's not only people part. Here we are looking as well how the people react to the leaders. And here where the interest came up, right? Because here we started measuring not only how efficient we were in what we were trying to deliver in our change message, but we started measuring how supportive this organization is toward you as a leader. How much do they trust you? Because by trusting you, they trust your program, they trust your change. And how is this later on translated in results? How do they actually see you? And here the idea of leadership profilization came into place. It started as a test, to be honest. We were not having any experts from outside to teach us the know-how, but then it ended up being quite important because in all the discussions that we had for big or extra large change implementation, and here I'm talking also about organization, reorganization, I'm talking as well about the business process outsourcing mechanism, we would evaluate the first thing, the leader who would deliver the message. It was very important to see what was this leader and how this message was going to be perceived based on his or her profile. At the same time, we started evaluating the profiles of the change managers per se. We didn't have change managers in our organization. As I mentioned to you before, we mainly had transformation managers. We had migration managers. We had, I'm losing the words because we changed it so many times. But overall, the idea was deliverables, but change management per se, what are the deliverables? And here is how we started establishing the deliverables. Measure deliverables, of course. I was working for very long with finance organization, reorganization and change and process efficiencies and so on. And believe me, I mean, like the main finance folks, all the decisions are based on numbers. But what when we were talking with sales? What when we were talking with marketing? Well, with marketing, to be honest, is much more visual based, if I can say so. If we show them how visually the things will transform, I mean, not that I want to say that they are superficial, of course, but it made to them much more impact to look at a more, let's say, structured visual rather than numbers. And then we had sales. Well, for sales, we had to act it fast, right? Because there we have the guys who are all the time living on the edge of their objectives. So the change there had to be managed fast and really trying to make it sustainable. That was the challenge. Operations, I will not stop a lot in operations because in operations basically the stability is pretty high if we are talking about having the change and managing it. However, it is challenging. Still there we have a quite combust setup. But again, in terms of deployment, straightforward for the ADCAR is the one that we use and basically what I wanted to highlight for today. Followed by the roles. I will stop here shortly, not because most of you are aware about the roles in change management. I did understand we have a lot of change practitioner followers here joining. However, here where I want to stop is on the sponsor role. What I was actually mentioning before to you, the struggle faced on how to actually make the sponsor understand that he or she had to support the project and had to support the project on such a level that he or she was responsible to deliver this change message. And the way how this change message is delivered is actually affecting his profile trust or her profile trust and directly impacting the success definition of the program. Well, a lot of change management started with the sponsor. As you may know, in most of the cases, it was structured in such a way that we were trying to advocate through the middle level management. Of course, this change management was sitting and is currently sitting on the middle one and is kind of influencing more in a sandwich form, right? Starting with the sponsors and then going on down to the subordinate level. Of course, here it is shown as an enabling role, the change practitioner role, but again, here I would like in a moment to show you basically how it looks more in our sustainability setup. Because again, going back to the initial problem to solve, we do all of these implementations, we do all of these reorganizations, but there are always bits and pieces missing at the end, or bits and pieces that we realize that are missing because there is no setup to be sustained there. Basically, you leave it with the function. You leave it with the, how do we call it, business as usual. But ultimately, in responsibility side, we need to have a point of direction. We need to have a structure in place. Now, the benefit of this structure, it should come quantificable, because if not, then we would be challenged. However, if I move to a more enterprise change management example, and here there is a Kridner Consulting, is an Australian actually consulting for change management. It's a pretty old one, if I would say so. But what I found interesting here and why the deployment of this program in my current role took this direction was due to two elements. One, it was connected to a global setup of processes. We call it global business solutions. So here we were not transitioning anymore. Here we were integrating. So we had all the pieces of the puzzle, but not all of them fitted with each other. So we kind of have to work on the shape of the puzzle pieces, right? And in order to work on the shape of the puzzle pieces, we needed to engage them. We needed to start from the engagement and then combine this engagement with the change. We had two structures. One was on a program level and the other one was on a work stream level. Work stream or function, sub-function, however you want to call it in your notificables. But basically the program level was trying to mainly oversee it rather than to rely on the ownership. And the first thing that we changed was that we actually enabled the program to become owner of the change. We said, guys, you are the owners, you are the program, you own it, and you need to define your success together with the leadership team, together with the sponsor. You need to bring the sponsor in the room and define what does the sponsor success means like, and how are we going to break this down to all the levels of the organization. Well, easier said than done, right? But data-wise, basically, it worked, and it really gave a quite quantifiable effect when we were integrating it. Sustainability. A lot of change fatigue in the last 10 years. We were changing, we were changing processes, changing products, organization structure. Okay, we are trying to do it different this time, digital transformation, everything happening at the same time. Not to go into the COVID discussion. I saw there is a speaker talking about the change management during that time. A very big change fatigue intermediate. Why people and process adoption rate is behind business requirements change rate. For the ones that are not familiar, this is Marty's law, and the focus was to decrease the gap. Make it sustainable. We needed to have the organization change muscle set up. Change as a core capability and elite building. We couldn't anymore chase our own tail. We needed to find a sustainable solution. And how to do that? Basically, what worked for us was to combine the role of the change practitioner with function delegates. Again, here, an example. In finance organization, we are always looking for efficiencies, right? It's a supporting function. We always want to be efficient, do our process the best, lower cost, etc., etc. Why do we need to hire again people? Like, don't we, have enough? Can't we do it with internal resources? And here the combination was not to build a machinery or a factory of people that would deliver change practitioners all around the organization, but was basically to partner with function delegates, finance, from sales, from operations, and try to infiltrate this knowledge of practicing change properly and with the aggregate objective results through basically joining these leadership forums. We uplift the role of the change practitioner from the middle management to the leadership setup in ways of working, transformation agendas, leadership profiling, and of course, change management knowledge build-up. Function delegates would have profile selections, end-to-end training, and of course, building a capability within the function. They had the knowledge of the business or the function they were responsible. The missing piece would come from the change practitioner, and over time, we would see the role of the change practitioner more going as an advisory role within the organization. Change practitioner guides, supports delegates to sustain constant deep change. Well, this is actually an interesting partnership, is in place. It has different results in different functions. That's the interesting part. But what I can say where it works the best is where we have mainly integration changes, or changes that are mainly affecting people's side, but not only. Sometimes leadership side, sometimes reorganizations, which are actually one of the critical items that we are targeting through the change management. I would like to, close it in a way that gives some optimism, but at the same time remains across some practicality. It was very difficult to start with the change management setup, and usually we didn't have a lot of opportunities. Of course, we had consultants and advisories and all of that, but we didn't find a lot of opportunities outside, so we were kind of all the time focusing it from the inside out. And this is why the way how I was looking at it at the time until today made me thought that actually it's not always supposed to be super fancy, right? I mean, I know it's better when it's fancy, when you have the consulting group preparing it for you and you exchange experience and you have all of this, a setup of the trainings in place. But what about the small, extra small, medium companies that they can't. I mean, cost-wise, they want to. I mean, they want to care about employees, but they can't. So today's, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to leave you with, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can.
So, Eneida, thank you very much for sharing the change and sustainability of change with us. I also would have one question to you. As I understood, the leaders, of course, are one of the main success factors to have as your change practitioners. And how did you convince and how did you upskill your leaders to be in this role of change practitioner during the next, for the next years too? Can you share a little bit of that too?
Absolutely. Thank you for the question, Jasmine. So basically, one of the main things that we did is gaining the trust of these leaders. This is how it started, to get them focused. And this was done by doing leadership profilization. We did their profiles. Where were their strengths? Where were their weaknesses? How the audience was looking at them? What was happening with them when they were delivering a message? What was their reaction? How did their organization react toward them? Not always is positive, I can say that. There is some resistance, but where was this resistance coming from? And showcasing this to the leaders, it actually gives them real data on what are actually the things that they would need to address in order to have the organization with them. This was the first step. The second step, of course, we had some very intense trainings, short ones. As you know, in the leadership setup, it's really no one has time to dedicate a lot to have the practitioner in place, unless we are talking about some executive MBAs there. I believe for that we all agree that there is more time. Of course, this intense training. And the third thing was the partnership was really very much close and built on trust. And how we did that is that basically not only we had professional build up from internally for this change part, we are talking about ex-project managers, but one feature that we were looking here, and it will sound a bit shallow, but it works, is the likability of the profile. All the time when we were looking at the change practitioners, we needed to make sure that this person profile is likable from the organization. What do I mean by likable? It's likable based on results, of course. It's not likable just because they see this person and they think that this person is good to go, right? But it's a profile which actually inspires engagement. It's a profile that it actually brings affinity. All of this sounds weird, are emotional features, but in change, one of the biggest elements is as well how to manage the emotion of change. So with these profiles, and of course, the concept of the training and being very closer to this leadership forum, this is how we enabled the selling point of the change to our leaders. Of course, this is an ongoing process. It doesn't stop. It has to be sustainable. In order to be sustainable, the partnership should continue. But as well, what should continue is the measurable results. The surveys, the interviews, and the community reaction. We measure it under project circumstances monthly. Then into the BAU, we do it quarterly. And I'm not talking about pulse surveys. Here I'm talking about strict change management surveys from the ADKAR model, from awareness up to reinforcement.
Thank you. One more specific question on that. As I understood, you select the leaders depending on their profile, who is, who can be in the role of a practitioner, of a change practitioner. Okay, so you're not having an overall training for all of your leaders to develop change skills, but especially for the ones you see in the position then for change management.
It's a more custom fit scenario, if I would have to say so. And here we're talking also about time invested from the leaders. So if we train everybody, I mean, it's good, right? I'm not saying so if you have the time, but we have to be more targeted. And in my organization, in terms of change management, we are much more targeted toward the results. So we need to make sure that if we train someone, it's for a really objective reason. And then we have in place this objective in order to deliver the results. Of course, we can be wrong, right? But this is based on assessments, it's based on tests, and it's based on surveys, which are actually backing up the case. Of course, there are some backup scenarios in terms of the community per se. There is a percentage, 5 to 10%, which we are considering here. But again, I would say that we really need to be sure while we take the decision of the profile that we are training, because the investment of the time overall, the project and the change implementation, it really makes a difference.
Thank you very much, Eneida.
Thank you,
Thanks.
everyone.